Thank you. Hi. Familiar faces and new ones. That's lovely. Thank you so much for being here. All right. I'm calling it Transformational Consciousness because we are entering a period where our old mindset is not working, and that's what we are watching falling apart around the world. There's so many things going on. I actually have a 2-hour slide presentation on all the things that are going along, both positive and negative. But these are some of the signs we have of the shifting times. You know, this global climate thing, right? Really? The local and global political instabilities. Everybody's acting weird. The processes aren't working. You know, new kinds of people are coming into office and they're doing things in weird ways. And then in that process and related to it and leading up to it are the many cultural norms that are breaking down. You know, a lot of what's going on in this country is what, Ray, I just lost his first name, the cultural creatives. Has called, the author is Ray, and the cultural creatives, what he is saying is the traditionals, the folks that remember what things were like in their growing up or in their fantasy of their growing up, and they want that now, okay? And they are in agony because it isn't happening and it isn't likely to happen. The breakdown of our cultural norms is huge for those people right now. And at the same time, we're having all these breakthroughs in science and technology. Oh my goodness. You know, we're finding 3 to 4 planets a day, other planets in other star systems. Some people are saying there is an average of 4 planets per star in this galaxy. And there's over 100 billion stars. I mean, that's amazing just in itself, right? And then we get into the medical breakthroughs and the, you know, all the other kinds of things that have been happening, you know, and the understanding of epigenetics. Is that a familiar term to you guys, your IONS folks? Yeah, and so on. So all of these kinds of understandings of our world are shifting and changing, and our understandings of what's possible are shifting and changing. And all of that then is augmented by this constant telecommunications all around the world. People, I was in Egypt for 3 weeks and people were upset because when I was on a boat on the Nile, they couldn't reach me. Wherever they were, I'm going, I get to have a few days without you. And we all get to, but we're now, many of us are unwilling or unable. We've gotten in the habit of constantly checking to see who needs what or who's telling us what. And so this constant telecommunications is changing who we think we are and how we think the world is. So these are just a few of the, the obvious major shifts that are going on. And we are responding to them. This is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, of which Habitat for Suites is a very prime example of the way we could be building, the ways we can be supporting the people we work with in our community. And I love that the number one is to eliminate poverty. Unfortunately, since poverty is relative, you're not going to eliminate it, but you can define a level of absolute poverty. And right now, that's the equivalent of having $1 a day, $1.25 a day to live on in whatever culture you're in, the equivalent of. So in Egypt, that would be 1 Egyptian pound to live on, okay? Which for us is a dime, okay? So it's going to be different in different cultures, but that's one. Zero hunger. Now that is an achievable goal, where food is available to everyone in every way. The good health and well-being, quality education. Gender equality is a sustainability goal. Now there's reasons for that. Educated women have fewer babies and are better, more engaged with their children, so the children grow up healthier and stronger. Yeah, that's a huge thing. In fact, there's a couple of guys right now that have written a book called Empty Planet. Anyone know about this book? They're Canadian, they're wonderful. And in this book, they have gone around the world and done focus groups with women all over the world. in rural Africa, in the slums of India, in suburban areas, in urban areas, all over the world. And what they have found is that women are refusing to be pressured into having a lot of kids, including in the slums of India. I love their story about this. I happened to hear an interview on Canadian broadcasting, not US, but Canadian broadcasting, and they were saying that these women were there in their saris in the slums of India, okay? And while they were talking, every now and then, their saris would glow a little bit. You know, and you know that beautiful sash that goes over the shoulder, and then their sari would glow a little bit. And at the end of the focus interview, at which point, during which they said, no, I'm not going to let my husband or his parents pressure me into having more kids. No, I only want 2 or 3 kids. I think that's best for me and for the children, and so on. And the guys are being blown away. Slum women, you know, the bottom of the bottom in our economic system. And as the meeting comes to an end, they're all pulling out their smartphones. These women have access to all the information we have access to. And there is a lot of information in Hindi. I discovered that when I was there in spring. Yeah, it's huge. It is huge. So we're going to see major shifts that we had no idea, and gender equality is part of that. And they're talking about affordable and clean energy, yes. Decent work and economic growth. This one is wrong. You cannot have sustainability and growth, right? Sustainable looks like this. It doesn't look like that, right? So what you want is sustainable economics within a range that is good for the region and for the population, not increasing growth. When they say economic growth, they're talking about certain areas being brought up to a standard, but we have this thing, and there's this wonderful TED Talk by a woman named Raworth, R-A-T-W-O-R-T-H, on the myth of growth. It's just beautiful. And she says, you know, the leaders of today's world are happy to give you, alternatives to what we've had in the past. They're happy to give you green growth, sustainable growth, any kind of thing, as long as it's growth, because they've got this weird notion based on an economic theory that has been developed since the 1930s about what makes a healthy economy. Okay? If you want to know more about theories of economics and kind of make sense out of it, there's a wonderful book called The Worldly Philosophers by Robert Heilbroner. I discovered it in graduate school. My kids got it in high school. Yes! All right. Another, sustainable cities, reduced inequalities of all kinds. That's age and race and religion. Responsible consumption and production, that goes without saying. Climate action. Life below water. There's a huge dead zone off the Oregon coast. It's just dead. Nothing's living there. There have been years where the crabbers have gone off and they just pulled dead crabs up. Yeah, it's just not happening. There is no oxygen in the water in this zone in the ocean. There are places in the Mediterranean that are like that too. We have not been thinking about the ocean as a living system, which it is. Right? The Earth, the whole biosphere is a living system. And then within that living system, the oceans and the rivers and all the different ecosystems are alive. And we need to do that. And life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions. And I have a little problem with that word institutions because that means that something has been concretized. And one of my favorite cartoons, just recently discovered, is there is someone out in the world who has found truth and is just really expressing it beautifully. And one of the devil's minions is running back to the devil and saying, we got a problem here, boss. We got a problem. This guy's got a message and he's getting through to people. And the devil says, don't worry about it. We'll just turn it into an institution. And finally, we have partnerships. All right? These are the 17 sustainable UN goals, and normally I put a chart up here that says where all the different countries are. In 2015, the US was number 10. In 2018, we were number 37. These are some of the very, very many NGOs that have formed to try to bring those things about. When I first set this up, what happened with my Google page, I was searching on Google, and then this banner started going across, name after name after name after name of sustainable nonprofit sustainability organizations. There are hundreds of them. And they have two different approaches. One is what we are beginning to call the green solutions, the green economic solutions. These solar farms or these wind farms, which frankly, I don't think are very green. Right? They're large scale. They're high production cost. They are tied into the global power grid, which in itself is not very sustainable, right? Have you thought about how much aluminum is in those big robots that are walking across the land holding those wires? It's just horrendous, the grid. And fundamentally, these green solutions are saying, we can go on as if nothing was different, okay? So it's not bad in its it's a step in the direction, it's waking people up, but it isn't exactly going to be sustainable with this system. There's the opposite extreme, and that is to take a piece of fabric and some local branches and put them together in a way with a bunch of woven rugs you've had for generations, and then put a small solar array and a small disc out there, and every 6 months, pack it up onto your motorcycle and some sheep and carry it to the new grazing lands. Right? This is a smart home in Outer Mongolia. And I love this one because in a home very much like this, a young man, a 16-year-old, can you see okay? Because I can back up. A 16-year-old was out and about. He was in town, and he got to chatting with an MIT engineering grad student who was there working on a project. And he was asking some very interesting questions. So the grad student said, MIT offers a lot of free courses online. And do you know there are 100 universities that offer accredited courses free online? You can take almost any course you want. Anyway, so this kid signed up for this engineering class at MIT. 16-year-old from Outer Mongolia, living like this, taking care of sheep, got the top score ever achieved in that class. Needless to say, he got a full scholarship and is now studying at MIT. This is the nature of the world we're in. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. So the indigenous solution is take those 1 or 2 or 3 things that will move you in the direction of what it is you're trying to accomplish without causing any obstruction to the world around you. The reason that we have these 2 kinds of differences is we have 2 very different kinds of cultures on the planet. One of my degrees is in anthropology. And I grew up in a family of art historians, archaeologists, and that kind of world, as well as nuclear physicists. It was an interesting world. And so defining our culture and the language that we are taught when we are infants and the kinds of education system we're raised in or religious system defines our consciousness. And our consciousness in this case, I'm saying the framework we bring to everything we perceive and to everything we project. So we have this mental framework, all right? And my mental framework is going to limit what I can see. So as I grow up, I'm going to start letting go of bits and pieces of my original mental framework if I want to have, quote, expanded consciousness, if I want to be able to accomplish things beyond what people thought when I was 3 years old and the decisions that I made between 3 and 12 years old. Yeah? So that's what we're doing, all right? The culture is the place where that happens. The parents, the teachers, the churches, the grandparents, the neighbors' kids. How many of us made decisions in middle school we're still living from? Because the other kids in middle school said that was how it was. All right? I strongly recommend letting go of them. Okay, so let's look at what the major culture forms are on the planet. This one has been around for hundreds of thousands of years. It's hunting-gathering tribes, And I've also added to it the river gardening villages that started to emerge about 10,000 years ago. Now we have evidence of, there are some hunting gathering tribes that have not changed for 200,000 years. They've been in the same basic area. They can tell stories about, there you go. They can tell stories about the remains of Pleistocene animals. I mean, they've been there that long, right? So we know that that way of life is sustainable, even though we have called it quite primitive. Now, what's interesting about a hunting-gathering lifestyle is it takes about an hour and a half a day to meet all your food, clothing, and fiber needs. Food, clothing, and shelter. About an hour and a half a day. So the rest of the time is spent communing with nature, communing with each other, making love, making art, enjoying life. That's pretty amazing. And that's how the bulk of humanity has lived for the bulk of human prehistory into historical period. Now, as I say, about 10,000 years ago, as the glaciers began to retreat, whole new areas of land began to open up. There were new rangelands, there were new rivers, there were new lakes, there were all kinds of things that weren't there before. And people began to, the population began to expand into those areas, you know. There would be, what we know as archaeologists and anthropologists is if you get a group that's got up to about 120, 150 people, they will split up. They will generally split up into 2 or 3 groups, and then they'll start going off. Well, as the population begins to grow, because you got land to work through, then groups start splitting off, and they go off to these other places. As they moved into some of these new river areas with these young forests, they found that the weather was a little better, plants were around more, they could go back to the same spot again and again and again. The gatherers, mostly females, would go back and leave just enough so there was going to be some next year, right? They would gather a little bit, and maybe they would put a little mulch over it, or they would make sure there was the carcass of a fish or a bird nearby to help feed the plants or whatever. And that led to what I call the river gardening village, because after a while you don't have to go anywhere. Your food's all happening right here. So you stick around. And so instead of making temporary shelters that can be moved around, you start making more permanent structures. And part of that is young men have testosterone. Sometimes a little more than a community really wants. So they used to get sent out, and they used to do a lot of hunting, big game animals or whatever, or the great big fish or whatever. But when you start being in one spot, you may not have the herds nearby. So you give them new kinds of tasks. You tell them, you see that great big rock over there? Do you think you could get on top of this big rock over here? And a lot of dolmens and megaliths start to show up, where these young men are given these impossible tasks that engage their brain, engage their body, they're working together to get this goal accomplished. And they start building stone structures, and we start seeing the formation of stable village life. And by village, we're talking of up to maybe 200 households, usually about 50 households. Sound reasonable? So this is starting about 10,000 years ago. And one of the things that we see is that leadership has begun to change, because in a hunting-gathering tribe where you're moving from place to place, the person that has the leadership power usually is the one who can intuit where the herds are going, or the woman who can intuit where the plants that they need are going to be. And so that kind of intuitional ability, plus the capacity for restoring harmony in the community, were the 2 most important things. When you're stable, it's a different kind of intuition, right? It's no longer where are the herds, it's what's happening here, and how can we make this work for the long term. It's a different kind of intuition. And we start seeing a very different kind of artifact as a result. And these artifacts are now called Venus figurines. And because most of our archaeologists are in their 20s and 30s, they think they are badly misshapen female figures. They have never seen a postmenopausal woman's body. These are grandmothers. Every single one of them. I look at the figure, I know who that is. I have a friend who looks just like that one, or a friend who looks just like that one. So these are honoring the intuition and the wisdom of the grandmothers who are the ones who are leading and guiding in the river gardening villages. Totally different way of relating to the world. And the earth is now our mother in a way that is far more obvious than even for the hunting and gathering guys. You got this? So we're talking thousands of years here. We know some villages that we have accounting for bodies for almost every household, and there is no violent death for 800 years. I mean, this is not a violent community. It's got a very different set of values from the kinds of things we've been accustomed to thinking are normal human values in our culture. So about 4000 BCE, something happened. We don't know exactly what it was. It might have been an asteroid landing in the southern Atlantic. It might have been a major volcano going off. We got no idea. But when it was over, a large part of the middle band of Asia and Africa was now desert. Huge rangelands were no longer supporting the animals or the people who depended on them. And so people were migrating into those river valleys where those little villages were. Well, you can handle a little bit of that, but as we are seeing in the world today, massive immigration causes all kinds of stress, right? So in some ways, we're going through today what those folks were going through about 4000 BC, about 6,000 years ago. So we start seeing new kinds of ways of dealing with things. And what began to emerge is what I call the medieval fiefdom. It's the beginning of the kingdoms, someone being in charge because we got no way to do it. And in many cases, it's a combination of male and female. I was very, very fortunate and did a lot of traveling this last year and got to spend 3 weeks wandering around in Egypt. It was wonderful. And one of the things that I was able to confirm was something that I had begun to understand when I was a teenager, and that is Pharaoh is always two people, male and female. It is never a guy. And by the way, the word Pharaoh was the Greek term for the person who they thought was in charge. Okay? So this person or this couple is always the two, the animus and the anima, the masculine and the feminine, the intuition of the feminine, as well as the strength and the wisdom and the leadership of the masculine, the two all together. And that grew out of the river gardening villages where the men's world was led in one way and the women's world was led in another way, and the women's wisdom, the grandmothers, were willing to and able to work with the guy who was able to teach the advanced skills among the men's world. Make sense? So as we're moving forward and we got more and more people condensed into a tighter and tighter area, different social systems emerge, different living systems emerge. We start seeing the city-state emerge. We start seeing, okay, this is a controlled area and we're going to enforce different kinds of rules because people aren't coming from the same backgrounds. Yeah, that happens, isn't it? Yeah. The American public school system was created because we had so many immigrants and we needed to have a consistent labor force. That's what it was created for. It was to unify all these immigrants from all these different backgrounds into one consistent way of thinking and speaking so that they could work in the factories and in the retail establishments. We haven't done that very effectively for a while, but that is what it was intended for. And every culture since that first set of migrations into the city-states has had to deal with that, basically from the Tigris and Euphrates and Nile up into, across into the Indus Valley and up into Asia Minor. Well then, that was how people were living for a very long time. It began to be empires, those little city-states. People brought them together and they brought it, so these guys had to have more and more and more and more. The motto that was passed on from father to son was grow, acquire more, acquire more, acquire more. And the idea was, okay, I'm going to take over those lands and I'm going to get enough wealth from those lands that I'm going to take it home and then they're going to help support us. And that's how it was all the way up to the 1600s. But during that time, toward the end of that time, something very strange happened. It was the formation of the monasteries. Okay, and one of the leading coordinators of those monasteries was a guy named Saint Benedict. Has anyone heard of Benedict's rule? All right, so the essence of Benedict's rule that we know about is, well, it's written, but that most of us know about is you spend 4 hours a day in prayer, you spend 4 hours a day doing work out there, and you spend 4 hours a day in silence, okay? But there's more to it than that. One of the rules is, when you join the monastery, whoever you were before is no longer relevant. We're all brothers. We're all equal in the eyes of God. We're all equal in the eyes of God. During the medieval fiefdom period, that was an odd thing to do, wasn't it? During the time when the king owned everything and the emperor controlled the king, and then the king appointed certain people to have power, and the average person had no power at all. So now that doesn't happen anymore in the monastery. The second thing about the monasteries, there's a wonderful book called Medieval Machine that explains this beautifully. There were certain brothers, sets of brothers, who would go off, certain orders that would say, King, could you give us 50 acres of your worst land, please? We need to expand. So 9 Cistercians would go and they would take a small herd of sheep, maybe a dozen sheep, and they'd go to the worst land in the kingdom, and they would convert the land to some of the best land in the kingdom, using the sheep to fertilize, to trample, to restore the land. And as the sheep herds grew, they hired local people to be shepherds. And as they produced more and more wool, they hired local people to help shear the wool. And as they produced more, they actually built their monasteries as water-powered milling companies, factories, in 1000 AD, or CE, Common Era. We're not accustomed to thinking of that being that far back. Often those 9 brothers would have 3,000 people working with them. 3,000 people in the kingdom who heard, once you are a monk, we're all equal in the eyes of God. Now there was another thing in Benedict's rule most of us have no idea of, and that is, yes, they are subject to the bishop and the pope, but within the abbey, within the monastery, they elect their own leadership. We are all equal, and we elect our leadership. Ever hear of anything like this before? That was when that started, about 1000 CE, and it percolated through the whole of Europe, and by the time King Henry VIII was around, we're looking at 1600, plus or minus, and he's gone, that's undermining my power, and besides, I want all that land. So a new trend started of eliminating the monasteries throughout Europe, but they went underground, and they became, what were the most of the founding farmers of America, or founding fathers of America, what were they members of? Masons. Exactly. So those values became part of Freemasonry. And that then carried those values forward and helped to lead to what I'm calling the Democratic Republic. Okay? The idea that everyone is equal and you elect your leadership and then you trust your leadership with the right to make the decisions, and if they do something wrong, you call them on the carpet. That we forget. But that was part of the rule. So we have a whole new way of living as a result of St. Benedict's rule in the monasteries. I kind of like that. And it's what has built this incredible experience we're having now. We could not be here doing what we are doing now, and I'll bet every one of you has a cell phone and most of you drove a car. You know, all of these things are possible because the Democratic Republics happened. It's amazing. The other thing that happened was ownership of land, which, as the sign in my room, the poster of Chief Seattle's speech, reminds me, ownership of land, are you kidding me? But that's another story I'm happy to go into later. Or you can read it, it's on my sharings page on my website. So what happened is, we got so excited we could do this and we can do this and we can do this. We exceeded the capacity of the earth to support us. That's what that dotted line means. That's the limit of the capacity of the earth to support. Somewhere back around 4 billion is probably where we should have stopped, okay? But we didn't because we're so excited, right? Now those guys who are talking about empty planet, their projection, and they are not alone, they talked to a bunch of demographers, is we'll peak at 11 billion here in another 5 years or so, and then we'll drop. And we'll drop back to 7 billion within another 5 or 10 years, and then we'll keep going down from there. They expect the population of the earth by 2050 to be this level, you know, below the level we are today. And they don't expect it to ever go back up again, which is an interesting model. All right, so this is where we are now, except something has begun to happen. There's a green line here. Something has happened in the last 20, 50 years, and obviously my numbers are very arbitrary here. I'm giving you whole numbers, but my actual belief here is 1965 is the beginning of the new culture that is emerging and that you all are part of. Yeah, this hotel is part of. Every one of you who is willing to look at how you live on this planet and how you are related to each other and other animals and beings in the planet, in the solar system, in the galaxy, are part of this new culture. It has a whole different set of values. It has a whole different set of understandings. And I'm going to say we're looking at Silent Spring, The Tragedy of the Commons, those books, the Beatles, and a few other things in '65, right? Now, what's interesting about our culture and this time frame is that for most of the last several hundred years, it takes about 75 years for a concept to go from really way far out there to mainstream. Okay? How many of you studied Einstein's relativity in high school? Very good. How many of you did that in the 1960s? Okay, I got one or two. Okay, all right. Most of us did not hear about Einstein's relativity until 75 years after it was published. It wasn't in the school systems until then, right? If you had a very good physics teacher, you might have heard about it, or a really good general science teacher, you might have heard about it. But that was it. I didn't even get it in college when I was an undergrad. It wasn't until I was in grad school that I got quantum mechanics and Einstein's relativity, both of which were dating from 1906 and 1913. What? Right? It takes that long. So 1965 is 35 years before 2000, which means 2040 is the time when these ideas become mainstream. There's a little line there and that says when it started, which I'm going to say is about 2000, but it's on an exponential curve. And one of the things that I did on my travels this last year is I checked in to see what kinds of people are having these kinds of thoughts where. And I had a rug salesman in Montenegro talking about this stuff. I had a high school teacher in, where we were, Jaipur, talking about this. I had these fascinating people that I would never, ever, ever have thought would have been involved in these things. Being aware and being open and knowing that this is happening and wanting to help make it happen. Is that cool? So we are part of a whole new culture. Now, we can do it kicking and screaming and going, I really wish I could have had that palace, or I wish I had that Cadillac, or whatever. Or we can do it, well, I think I'm supposed to do it this way. Both of those are not helpful. Right? So if we have old programs from the culture, it's time to let go of those. Most of us have old training, old programs. Gee, I wish I could, because that would have fulfilled that dream that my mother had, or my uncle had, or my grandparents had, or that I got when I was 10. Those things we want to start letting go of. And we want to start being clear about what is the world that we want to be living in. So what is the consciousness that goes with this new kind of culture? Now, if we look at the past and we look at what Daniel Quinn in Ishmael calls taker and leaver cultures, did any of you read Ishmael? Oh, great. It was wonderful. It won the Ted Turner Prize for Best Novel to lead people into the future in 1993, I think it was. He came to Portland in 95 and we hosted a forum. It was just marvelous. So the basis of the story is this guy sees an ad in the paper. It says, teacher seeks student, and has an address. And so he goes to the address and it's a warehouse. And he goes into the warehouse, and in the office area where there's a glass window, he sees a gorilla. And that's it. And then there's a chair, and there's a sign on the chair, and he sits down on the chair, and he starts reading it, and he starts hearing some questions in his inner awareness. And he realizes, after a number of lessons, the gorilla is teaching him. And one of the things the gorilla teaches him is that there's two kinds of human cultures. There are leaver cultures, what we would call indigenous cultures today, and what I'm hoping the emerging culture will be more. Cultures that, take what they need and leave something to allow it to continue to develop. Instead of clear cutting, they would take one tree and leave three, that kind of thing, And then there are what he calls the taker cultures. I want what I want when I want it, and I'm going to take it regardless, which I'm calling empire culture. So we have the empire culture, which is constantly expanding and is taking. It develops new technologies. Whenever there is some kind of distress, it says, what kind of new tool can we have? Leonardo's drawings, many of them were just this. His ability to come up with new weapon systems, new delivery systems were tremendous. The various kinds of weaponry that we have is all new technology for we have a distress. They're trying to control the changes. Those solar things that we saw, the wind machines that we saw, are trying to control the changes, new technologies. And the idea is, how can we keep our life as familiar as possible? Right? Regardless of these changes, how can we live the same way we always have? Usually what's needed is to get more resources so that they take over more territory. The U.S. is an empire. How many of you accept that? Oh, good. Thank you. We would like to not be. We would like to think we're the good guys, but we have bases in 40 different countries. That says something to me, right? So we take over territory. We have corporate takeovers in other countries. We've got fingers everywhere. We have continued the model that was the norm through the 1600s and went into the 1800s in most of the world and then began to fall apart, except here. And basically, there's that growing thing again. In the empire world, it's continuing to grow as if nothing happened. So how many of you have read The Fall of the Roman Empire, Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, or The Third Reich, or any of those? Okay. So I studied in Latin in high school, so I had to learn this stuff. And one of the things that we have is everything that they did was to try to continue to live the way they'd always lived. As the Goths were coming and sacking the city, as the religious situation fell apart, the whole thing with the Colosseum was to keep the rabble busy so the senators could continue to live the way they always did. SPQR, Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and the people of Rome. Okay? The upper caste and everybody else. And that's how it was set up. Now, caste systems have been failing in the presence of this emerging culture. Equality and reducing limitations has been part of what this emerging culture is about. All those sustainability goals, except for the growth in the institutions, are part of the emerging culture values. And they also fit in with what the indigenous cultures, the leaver cultures, the ones that are sustaining, that are, where they think in terms of the seventh generation, right? 7 generations. Can you even imagine 7 generations? How many of you know 7 generations backwards in your family history? I know 4, and people think I'm amazing. Right? Behind me. And I make the number 5. And wow, 7 generations. Can we think that way? right? It means holding things in stewardship. It means making sure that they will last. It means not always, eliminating something and making it new. One of my folks on the Oregon coast that I work with, he went home to his family, his household, and met his third cousins or whatever. In Italy, they've been there 1,000 years. One household, one building, 1,000 years. Yeah, it's a whole different way of being, all right? They are still river gardening culture people happening to live in an empire culture nation. And we have some of those in this country, thank heavens. And Mother Earth News is partially supporting them, and there are other wonderful journals that are supporting them. All right, so the first thing that happens when you see distress or you're feeling distress is you look, you observe. You don't immediately go out and say, we gotta fix it. You stop and you look. Oh, what's really happening here? Where are the harmonies and disharmonies? What's going on inside us? What's going on around us? And you look at them in the individuals, and in the group overall, and in the world around you. And from there, the first act is to restore harmony inside and among the people. Now, a lot of you have heard interesting stories about communities in Africa where when someone is out of line, the one in Botswana, the village tradition in Botswana, I love this. Someone goes out of line and they don't, reprimand him or anything. They sit him on a throne in the middle of the village, and everyone comes and gives him a gift and says, I love you so much. Thank you for being who you are. That's it. It's not going to be out of line very much longer, huh? No. In the Native American cultures, what happens is in the dances and in the gatherings, there's usually some clowns, and if someone's been, out of line, they'll imitate the behavior in a funny way to demonstrate how out of line it is. And that's all it takes. Oh, I didn't realize how out of line I was. I get it, right? Now, that presumes there is someone raising the children with some kind of cultural understanding. We kind of lost that somewhere along the line in empire culture since World War II. My mother was a single mom. I remember the 3 preschools I went to. I'm sure a number of you have similar experiences either in your family or in your background. It was other people who produced me, right? I spent my summers on a farm. I learned more about how to live on that farm just during the summers than I could at home, because Mom wasn't there. She did what she could. She provided food, clothing, and shelter, and she sang to me at night and taught me to sing harmony. Yes. However, that kind of thing is not sufficient. I learned to cook and sew and can and garden and freeze and deal with kids and change diapers and all the things that an adult female knows how to do in our culture on the farm. Yeah. We don't have much of that left anymore in our culture. So it's very hard to have a very simple little, you're out of line here, kind of process. And we certainly, how many people in this room know enough people to have 20 or 40 or 50 people say, I love you so much. Yeah. We don't do this in our culture. Wouldn't that be marvelous if we did? Remember Queen for a Day on TV? It was an attempt to do that. All right, so when they restore harmony inside, they restore harmony among the people, and then they go, there's maybe something more we need to do, and that's where they adapt. They wait to see what's actually happening here and adapt to it. Just minor little tweaks. Like that, you're with the solar panel and the dish, right? That's a minor tweak. They're not hardly affecting their world around them at all with that. And then they do these slow adaptations. And if that works, fine. If they don't, they move. And what's interesting is they always leave a remnant behind. There's another wonderful book called Two Women. It's a book about Northwest Coast Indians. I'm sorry, I don't remember the author. This is one I don't see regularly enough to hang on to it. But two women, and two older women, that's what it was, two old women. And these women are postmenopausal, and they have just kind of given up. They're just sitting there riding on the laurels, and the group has to leave. There's a climate change, there's other things going on, they have to leave, so they leave these two women behind. And the two women sit there for a few days, and then they're hungry. Well, they have all the skills. So by the time the people come back 2 or 3 years later, there's a whole thriving village, because the two older women got up off their heinies and made life work for themselves and every passerby and whoever showed up. We all have the skills somewhere. We need to find them. And this is what our new culture is going to give us more. So there's some fundamental values in this new culture, and a few of you may recognize some of these terms, but the fundamental one is we are part of an interconnected web. You cannot do just one thing. My PhD is in systems science, and that's the fundamental principle. Second fundamental. The first one is it's all an interconnected whole. The second one is you can never do just one thing. Just picking up my mouse, I am not doing just one thing. I have changed things in this room. Okay? It is amazing when we start thinking that way. Related to that at the top, that we value the inherent worth and dignity of all beings, not just human beings, but all beings. We recognize they're all part of this interconnected web, right? And so the snake that I'm scared of, or the mosquitoes that I don't like, are just as important, right? Or if you're up in the Northwest Coast, the invisible black flies, right? I forgot what they call them. No-see-ums. They're all equally important. They all contribute to the interconnected web. And as you explore that, I'm going to go over on the other side, that means you're going to accept everybody. You're going to accept everybody as they show up. And if they get out of line, you're going to have a gentle way to pull them back in line so that the cultural norms can be continued. And if they need to be changed, they are changed over time gently. What that means is you've got compassion, and compassion leads to justice and equity. If I have compassion and acceptance for the people, then I'm not going to treat them as less than or greater than, am I? And I'm not going to let them get away with things or not get away with things, either way, right? And then that leads to a sense of global community. And if I am accepting and honoring, I'm going to honor this democratic process. I'm going to allow everyone to participate in the decision-making process. How many of you have seen the movie Dancing with Wolves? Yes, yeah, virtually all of you. One of my favorite scenes is the council meetings that they have when they realize they got problems. Because it really gives you a sense of small group democratic process. Every single person gets heard. Now, what is not quite so evident in that one, and is actually one of the bases for our bicameral legislature, is the grandmother's circle have an equal voice. So if the male council has come to a decision and the grandmothers are aware of it, and they are always aware of it, they have the right to say, you know, that's got some value, but we have to consider this. The grandmothers, those Venus figurines, those postmenopausal women who have had babies and raised kids and grown things and traveled for years and seen things, they have also developed their intuition. And they can now say, you know, you need to go back to the drawing board because you haven't thought of this, 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 or this. Or they can say, yes, we can do this. That's their job in those cultures. All right. And then, in order to do all that, there's this constant search. What is real here? Where am I in the picture? How do I fit in this interconnected web? Now, above and below are two important assumptions that are really rarely spoken of, but they are fundamental to this culture. And the top one is we are one people, one planet in a creative process. It is not static, right? It is a continuing creative process. And at the bottom, it's all within an eternal field of loving intelligence. Now this goes back to the quantum field, the quantum mechanical notion that, everything seems to be orderly. Now again, as a systems person, I see everything as the interaction of matter, energy, and information in the universal and material sense. And that information is the ground in which the matter and the energy are interacting. Information is the pattern. So where I have pattern, there is information. And that information is a pattern that is supportive of the development of all members of this interconnected web. So we call it loving. Supporting of all the development. So what we're saying here is this new culture is a whole new set of ways of thinking and different kind of consciousness, a different set of values, attitudes, and beliefs. And getting from one set to another set is not always fun. All right? We are shifting everything, for many of us, we're having to shift everything we thought was real and let it go and discover what is truly real. So I have in my mind, when I say what is real, I have a capital R. And what is real with a capital R is not the physical stuff. The physical stuff is changeable. It is responsive to our thoughts and feelings. So what is real, when people say get real, for me that means go inside. It doesn't mean deal with the cultural norms in our empire culture, because our empire culture, if you notice that dotted line, is falling apart. And that's what we're looking at. All those shifts that we talked about are a function of empire culture's impacts on the planet and its own falling apart. We are going through, we were in the late sensate period of the empire during the 60s and 70s, which is why there was the possibility of the re-emergence of this new culture. That's when it usually happens. And now we're actually going into the dissolution of the institutions of the empire. So don't be surprised that the judicial system doesn't work, that the Congress isn't working, the political system isn't working, that the educational system isn't working, that the healthcare system. These institutions are embedded in the principles of the empire culture, and they must fall apart. Now, we knew some of this in the 70s, and that's when I was working as a futurist, and I published reports, and everyone put them on the shelf and ignored them. And Stanford Research Institute was where I was working, and our reports would go up on the shelf and be ignored. And if such a prestigious institute was being ignored, then why was I doing this? Right? So that's when I started doing the other kinds of works that I'm doing, because I realized we got to go through a change of consciousness. So this is J.M. Fisher back in 2013 using emoticons. Aren't they sweet? Talking about this change process. Now, this is what happens when I teach a class. I used to teach in college, and I would teach technology and society and environment, and the relationships between these and how we make choices and we're having an impact on the world around us. And along about the 10th week of the 15-week semester, I'd get this red face. They did not like me. But by the 14th week, we were up there in that little happy face with the thumbs up, because they realized what it was they needed to be doing differently and thinking differently, right? The change process is not fun most of the way, right? There are the times when we're in despair. There are the times when we're angry. There are the times when we're going, Mom, it's got to be like this because I don't, we go into that place, and that's part of the process. As we become more emotionally mature, that gets more and more gentle, but it still is there. All right? So this is what we're dealing with, and we're dealing with it individually and collectively. Collectively in our families, collectively in our neighborhoods and communities, collectively as a nation, collectively as a planet. This is what we're going through. And so when you see people behaving these ways, just recognize they're at that point in this change process. This is not something you are stuck with forever. Now, one of the things that I do is I track the Christian broadcasting stations when I'm out and about, because I'm a futurist and I'm interested in spirituality. And last week, I think it was, Joel Osteen gave a fascinating sermon on TBN, the Trinity Broadcasting Network. Joel Osteen, he's still in Houston, right? Yeah. And it was, all the people around you are not necessarily going to be doing what you think is right. Love them anyway. The people around you might be going on a path that you think is absolutely awful. Keep loving them. That was his sermon. I love it. Yeah, amen to that. You know, it was telling people, don't get caught up in whatever they're going through. Remain in that place of the love that is between you. When my husband and I were in that stage where it had been over 20 years and we were going two different ways, I was not willing to throw away the relationship, and besides that, we had kids. And so as I went through my process to let go of what had accumulated over those years that I hadn't allowed myself to feel during the years, I would get in touch with those feelings and I would work myself through them. And I have a process. It's on my website. It's called Ruth's Method for Releasing the Past. It's free. Click here, get a PDF, do the process if you want. It got me to the place where I could say, okay, regardless of the form of our relationship, the love between us remains. And we lovingly co-parent our kids. He's been my big brother ever since. It's been marvelous. We're lovingly engaged with the family. And there was a point, I think the best point, one of the high points of my life, the kids had been out of high school for a few years. I think they were even out of college at this point. And they said, Mom, we didn't realize you guys had got divorced. You weren't angry at each other. Okay, so this is what I'm going to go over that we went over on the 15th, and that is alchemy. What I was saying on the 15th is this time of year, all of the stories and all of the rituals are actually the alchemical process. So that period from the beginning of Advent to Epiphany, this 6-week period, is the time when we get to go through this process. Now I'm going to go through the one that is most clearly about changing consciousness. The alchemists talked about the philosopher's stone. They talked about turning lead into gold, but more often than not, what they were looking at was turning themselves from the couple up at the top, which is the happy female and the devilish male, to one unified being on the 11 o'clock hour, if you will. So it's a process of becoming one whole being. One of the interesting things about being in Egypt is the personification of the Nile River is a being called Min, and that being is half masculine, half feminine. Androgynous, fully integrated, just an integrated being, and that is part of what alchemy is about. How can I integrate what Carl Jung called the anima and the animus, so I am a whole, full, complete human being, right? And that's a large part of what alchemy gets in touch with, but it also gets in touch with that devilish sort of quality. So the first thing, this is the 7-stage one. Those of you who were there on the 15th, I gave you 2. This is just I'm only going to do the 1 stage. There's a 4-stage version and a 7-stage. But I like this one because it really gets in touch with what we have to do. And the first thing is, we got to let go of our attachments to what was. I had to let go of my dreams of what my marriage could be in order to allow the relationship to be what it is. Right? And I had to let go of my dreams of what a job could be in order to be able to move on to what I was really being called to do, et cetera. We have to do that. So that's the first thing. In the physical, we are taking this basic material that we're starting with and we're burning it into ash. But in the interior work, we're beginning to break through those attachments. Okay? And that sometimes is a traumatic event. And that sometimes is a long, slow event that gets us to the place where we go, oh, I have to let go of that. I can't continue to be and do that. Yeah? And there's a humbling of ourselves in that. The humility is letting go of the fact that I was really good, or I was identified as that, right? I'm a wife. No, I'm not a wife anymore. Oh dear. I'm, so-and-so's, I'm Mrs. So-and-so, or I'm Dr. So-and-so in the University of such and such. No, that's not working anymore. Whatever it was time to let go of the attachment to that and to acknowledge that, no, I'm just me. I had that role for a while, I'll have that role for a while, but really, I'm just this human being on a path. And what begins to happen then is we start going inside. How many of you have sat looking into a fire, the flames, and you start going inside, right? Isn't that marvelous? Yeah, that's part of why so many households are willing to do almost anything to have something that looks like a fire. Yeah, because that's so important. All right, the second part, physically you take those ashes and you dissolve them, okay? But what you're actually doing is going into the waters of the unconscious, the feelings. Waters stands for feelings. Even in the book of Genesis, you can look at it that way, all right? And there's many, many times where if we really look at our feelings, we realize, whoops, I was not acknowledging that. I had some ideas there that I didn't even realize, and I was just burying them. So this is where we're doing that. And finally, we begin to find those parts that we haven't expected or wanted to say, oh yeah, that's part of me too. That's part of me too. Yeah? And that's, if we're ever going to be whole, we have to do that, right? We have to find those rejected parts. Often those rejected parts are the best parts of ourselves. I had a period, I was working for a housing agency. It was very fun. We were building low-income housing, but everyone who worked there except the director had to rent rooms. I thought that was very interesting. But I was renting this room in this house, and the woman would go away. She worked in a school system, and she'd come home in the evening, and she would just go on glowing descriptions of the people she worked with. So-and-so is so brilliant, so beautiful, so gifted, so whatever. And then she would talk miserably about herself. All right? And this went on for several weeks. And then a crisis happened in her life, and I understood, oh, this is why I'm living here. And then I suggested, if you want to get out of this crisis, you might consider the possibility that all the accolades you've been giving to everyone else are for you too. And the model that I used, it turns out that her mother had died when she was young, and nuns, her auntie nuns, had been her primary parenting presences, and they had raised her on a model called the crucified Christ. Now, I'd like to point out that there were no crucifixes in Christian churches until 1220 AD. There were 1,200 years where Christians did not focus on the crucifix. Instead, they focused on the resurrected Christ, and the Eastern Orthodox and the Russian Orthodox still do. So I'm suggesting that this is about the resurrection, right? And I said, what would happen if you focused on the resurrected Christ instead of the crucified Christ? And it began the turnaround. It began the shift from thinking about herself as this miserable mea culpa, I've done all these terrible things, to maybe I have some worth after all. And then I suggested she start praising her sons, who were, they didn't want anything to do with her. Well, of course they didn't. She didn't want anything to do with her. Why would they want anything to do with her, right? And so she began to think, well, I suggested she take all her favorite memories of times with her sons and catalog them, write them down, think about them, remember them, play them over and over in her head. It took less than 6 months before they were coming to visit, inviting her to their wedding, inviting her to childbirth, inviting to all of this, and it was just this huge turnaround. And she still has a tendency to say everyone else is wonderful, but she no longer says she's miserable. And that's where we start. We have to unearth those parts that we've rejected, our wonderful parts, as well as the parts that we don't like. And in many cases, our wonderful parts are parts we've been trained not to like. How many women, as girls, were taught, Don't shine in the classroom. The boys won't like that. Don't be so smart. And when I teach ministers, when I train ministers, the first thing I have to tell them is you get to be out there and express yourself. You have to. And they're going, is it really okay? Is it really okay? It takes 2 years to get them to where they can express themselves because they've been so conditioned that they shouldn't. It's an odd culture we live in. It really is. All right. And the water is asking us to let go of those ideas and to release all those structures, the assumptions and the beliefs and the memories and the rules. And I have this thing, the shoulds are there's 5 toxic words in the English language. Should, ought, must, gotta, have to. People who live like that are getting sick. As soon as you can get rid of those, you start to blossom. And that's what we're doing here. And that's what this guy is doing. He's looking at this stuff that's dissolved in the water. And one of the things the alchemists of the 14th through 16th, 17th centuries used to do is get hung up in the pattern of what's going on in the water. And they'd start reading all these wonderful mythic stories into them and all these possibilities and archetypal messages, and this was fabulous. And like every other power that we have, the Hindus call them siddhis, it's also a distraction. It can be a distraction. And that's one of the reasons I'm not doing that work that I was doing. So then we need to filter out what's come up. We have all this stuff in this solution, right? What are we going to do with it next? So now we filter it, and we go through the stuff in the filter, and we say, oh, I'll take that, and I'll take that, and I'll take that, and I'll take that, right? So we're going to discard, we're going to find the stuff that we want, that was unconscious. It was in the waters of the unconscious. And we're going to say, okay, that's who I want to be. That's what I think being fully human looks like. I'm not rejecting any part of me. I'm recognizing these are all parts of me. And in the process that's on my website, this is the point I call the acknowledgement. This is the point at which I'm saying, none of that was fun or good or whatever, but I'm who I am now because I went through it. I need to honor that. I couldn't be moving forward from this point if I hadn't had those experiences, if I hadn't made those decisions. There have been times I've kicked myself for leaving academia or for whatever because I would have such a nice life now. Really? I wouldn't have survived. All right. But then there's this other part, the parts of our shadow that are holding us back. The tendency to say, oh no, I'm not good enough. That's part of our shadow. That's holding us back, right? Oh no, it's not okay for people to do that. Or, for me, one of the things that I did is I was able to take time to travel this year. I could easily have talked myself out of it because I had contracts to work for churches. And then I went to the churches and I said, I have this opportunity. I've never ever had this opportunity before. The money and the people and the place are all coming together. And they said, oh, go with our blessing. And I went, oh, really? I can do this? Wow. So I was on the road 12 weeks this year. It was amazing. I was out of the country 12 weeks. Okay, so we want to discard the parts that are legitimately keeping us from being who we are. And sometimes they're stories. Stories about, well, when I was growing up, we had to do this. Or when I was growing up, I was trained to do this. Or so-and-so has always been like this, and I have to live with it. Or whatever it is. Those stories are often the things that keep us back. And I have a guy that I work with quite a bit, and I've got him to the point now where he can actually accept money. His story was keeping him from accepting money. I've got him to the point where he can actually do what he loves 10, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and accept money for it. Wow. What a story he had to keep him from being able to do that, right? And he is happy, he is thriving. It's such a treat. It's not going to last forever. This is just a stage. But it's a wonderful stage because it says he's not in that place anymore, right? All right. So then we get to step 4. We're going to combine these in a new substance. So we've got all that stuff we've just filtered through. We're going to start reintegrating. Who am I now? Now, if you have been through either a divorce after a long marriage or a separation after a long relationship or the death of someone you were with for a long time, you know this place. The first year was, I don't have this presence to bounce off again. I don't know how to do this. And the second year is, oh, I wonder what it would be like if I could do this by myself. And the third year is, oh, gee, I get to be me. This is kind of cool, all right? And that's the stage we're at here, all right? Our unconscious and conscious begin to come together. We've designed ourselves. We've said, this is who I am. I recognize these unconscious elements, and I'm choosing these conscious elements, and I'm aware. I'm being in the observer when I get hooked. I'm being in the observer. Oh, I just got hooked. That's an old unconscious thing. I don't have to go there, okay? And that's something we work through. We're become aware that there are all kinds of things going out there in the world that I don't particularly like. I don't have to get hooked by it. It's just going on out there in the world. It's the show, as some people say, right? It's not my job. It's not my field, as Michael used to say in the movie. It's not my field. It's these kinds of things that we can begin to, as we can observe it in ourselves, we can observe it in the world and not get hooked, not get triggered, not get pulled into, I got to fix it. We accept it and we go, oh, the world is going through a process. I don't like it much, but you know, it's what is. So maybe I can help me and the rest of the world shift through this process. And we're free in that. I'm not hooked by anything. I'm free, right? And that means that we can be at peace. We can be at peace with the darker stuff. We can be at peace with who we have to be when we're in a social environment, right? And we don't, many of us don't like that mask, that persona that we are. Someone I was talking to earlier today said she's just learned how to do what she called shop talk, small talk. You know, what the weatherman said today. She's never had to do that before, right? And I get that. You know, that persona is uncomfortable. And this guy I was just talking about, who's now making money, had to learn a little bit of small talk in order to be able to do that. He'd never been able to do that. Now he can do it comfortably. Not taking it on, this is who I am, but that this is how we are in a social role. And he's found interesting ways to kind of tweak people and wake them up in the small talk, which is a fun game to play too. Which gets us then to an odd stage. You start putting yeast or bacteria in this stuff you've been putting together. You start introducing living material. Now when I was talking on the 15th about holidays, this is when we bring in the greens, and we bring in the fermented drinks, and we bring in the fruits, right, into the holidays. This is part of the process. We introduce these living processes so that we can move with the natural cycle of things. So it's an organic as well as chemical thing. Alchemy is not just chemistry, obviously. Alchemy, the physical process of alchemy was the basis for what became the science of chemistry, but there was this other thing. There's actually biochemistry in it, right? So this is where, as Jesus says, you will experience trials and tribulations. Now that doesn't mean that they are horrendous events. They can be, oh, the car needs attention and I don't really want to do that right now. I wonder why the car needs attention and I don't really want to do that. And if you pay attention, you can not break your leg. And if you don't pay attention, then it comes harder, and then it comes harder. And that's exactly what happened to me and why I've had to use a walker this visit and why I wasn't able to be here the 15th. Because I did not pay attention when it came in smaller ways. It had to hit me hard to get what it was I needed to do next. And we've all had this happen. Every single one of them. I say, when someone comes to me and tells me someone's had a diagnosis they have, or someone in their family, one of these terrible diagnoses, and I've been through them, I've had one or two over my life, it was a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call. It's saying, what I have been doing, thinking, feeling, and saying is not serving my body-mind system. That's all it's saying. It is not serving my body-mind system. Now, do I want to serve the body-mind system? What do I need to do that? That's what it is. And for some of us, there's an immediate turnaround, and for a lot of us, it takes a while. And that's okay. And the love of the people around us is what will get us through that process. Yeah. All right, and we go through that dark night. We go through that, everything is, there's a wonderful quote often on Facebook, and I downloaded it onto my computer. From the solid foundation of rock bottom, I took my first step. J.K. Rowling. All right, she got to the emotional, financial, physical rock bottom, and Harry Potter was the result. Yeah. When we get to that place and we allow it to be, we allow it. We don't run away from it. We don't pretend it's not happening. We allow it. We get to discover what the foundation is that we're going to move forward into. And the moment the dawn comes, it is amazing. Absolutely amazing. So these guys are adding the fermenting. They boil and condense the solution. Okay, so I've fermented it, I've got the bacteria cooking in there, but now they have to cook because I don't want them staying in there. Right? So we boil and condense it to purify the substance. We're getting everything out of it physically. And this is a large part of this is another stage where they would see the patterns that form. They'd look into the boiling crucible and they'd see the patterns and they'd get excited about what it was telling them. And for us, this is that point at which we are purifying ourselves. We are saying, now purify does not mean bleaching, and it doesn't mean anything that has to do with the Judeo-Christian tradition. In the Judeo tradition, to purify is simply to get into flowing water. That's all it means. Allowing the flowing water to wash over the outside and feel the spirit of the water wash through the inside. Isn't that beautiful? One of the things I often recommend is, people are really in their stuff. Go take a shower and let the shower wash it out of you, not just off of you. Right? Feel the water pouring through you. And this is what we're doing. And what begins to happen then is there is something new trying to take hold there. That we are literally planting a seed in that process of getting rid of all the detritus. And now there is the seed of the possibility. Okay? And this is why there are so many birthings at this time of year. The birth of Christ, the birth of Mithras, the birth of any number of, it's, Buddha's enlightenment. It's the point at which his new way of being is birthed. And it's free from the distinctions of the collective and the individual. I am no longer in that, through this process, I'm no longer affected by what the collective says or what other individuals say. It's their own stuff. This is the 4 agreements with Miguel Ruiz, right? Don't take it personally. It's them doing their own stuff. Now, to the extent that I am witnessing it, I have some consciousness that is obviously generating that experience. So I want to look at that. But it isn't about what they said. So I had a wonderful student who was terribly afraid that the wrong people would find out she was psychic. But she loved being psychic. She loved being a medical intuitive, and she was very proud of her skills. But she was terrified that people would find out and be judgmental. And every now and then someone would be moderately critical, and I'd say, your inner critic is speaking to you. The person, your own fear is coming back at you from the outside. She is no longer afraid, and nobody ever criticizes her again. It's funny. All right. We have to nourish that seed, okay? The Buddha was enlightened. he didn't stop meditating. In fact, the very first thing after he was enlightened was he sat under the Bodhi tree for 40 days. That was after the enlightenment, after he realized the nature of reality and his role in it. Isn't that amazing? So we nurture it. And contemplation, don't underestimate contemplation. If meditation isn't easy, contemplate. Read something that really wakes you up and contemplate it. Sit in front of a flower or a fire or a rainfall and contemplate it. It's every bit as effective as mindless meditation. It's actually mindful meditation, because what you've done is you've stopped the chatter, and that's the important thing. Okay? And the spiritual rituals are the same. Now, I'm not saying empty ritual. And this is, again, part of what's going on this time of year. We've got all these rituals. We're going to light the candles. We're going to sing the carols. We're going to say the blessings. Baruch atah Adonai. Yes, and it means so much when I say it. Yes. Oh. You know, all of these, we bring ourselves into these rituals. And in that, again, we've stopped the monkey mind. We stopped the chatter, and we are beginning to be more fully who we really are. All right? One more step. The light that is being born in us is exemplified by the light of the crucible of the alchemist. We're crystallizing that substance into a solid state. Isaac Newton went to Cambridge, and after a while he got interested in alchemy. And his roommate was the son of a wealthy man, and his roommate set up a laboratory for him and became his assistant. And it took him a number of years. But people who have looked at his journals have seen him go through these 7 stages of the alchemical process. And I believe it is no accident that when Isaac Newton came out, he was made the head of the British Mint 6 weeks after he shut down his lab. Right? He had learned not only the inner process, but the outer process of understanding the nature of stuff and the nature of who we are. So he could relate to someone who was forging the British coins, and he could read them like a book. And he could look at a British coin that was forged and know, or that had been shaved a little bit, and know, because he had gone through this process. Now, what he's done is he's integrated matter and spirit, inner and outer. He's unified the apparent dualities of the material world. There's no duality in spirit. I know all of you have had some kind of mystical experience. Was there any good or bad or dark or white in that mystical moment? No. Of course not. Duality is attached to the material world. Earth does not have duality except as we see it as a material process, as matter. As soon as we recognize she is a spirit developing and relating to us, all of a sudden the duality is gone, and we are part of her and she is part of us, and it's all one, right? The spirit becomes self-aware. And this is what a lot of enlightenment is simply going, oh, I see, I'm not this body. Oh my goodness, I'm that. Oh, wow. Right? That's really that thing that we call enlightenment. And then it's a matter of trying to live that. That's a whole other story. All right? So when I get that the inner and outer world are not different, then I get that whatever I'm seeing out there is just telling me what's going on in here, all of a sudden the world is not a scary place anymore. It's not a place where I have to worry about the bad and the good and the ugly and whatever. It is what the Course in Miracles calls a biofeedback mechanism. Actually, it just calls it a feedback mechanism. The world and the body are feedback mechanisms. They are showing us what we are thinking, feeling, doing, saying, and have been for however long. Now, some of us, it takes several weeks or months for something to show up. And some of us have instant karma, and it happens within a day or two. Yeah, whatever it is that we've been thinking, feeling, saying, or wondering about, oh, it's in my face. So a friend of mine and I were talking a few days ago, and he was saying, you know, we need a new MASH. We need MASH to be revived in a new way. Guess what is coming on the TV next month? A series called 68 Whiskey, a MASH unit in Afghanistan.
Sorry.
Oh, I said series, and the phone thought I said Siri. I didn't understand what you just said. Love that. All right, so we've got this. It perceives itself, but there's nothing out there. There is nothing out there. It is a green screen, and you are constantly projecting your inner state out there. All right? There are other energy beings, soul beings. Every one of you is this wonderful ball of energy. You're just amazing. And we overlap when we communicate. You think it's the words, it's not. Right? It's that overlapping energy. And the form that you're taking is the form that I am able to perceive through my mental framework. So if I want to perceive you as you truly are, guess what I have to do? Dissolve my attitudes and beliefs and assumptions and expectations and judgments around everything around me. Yes. So, the recognition that we are constantly creating our experience, we are constantly able to transform anything into anything just by our consciousness. And the ultimate lesson is this. And one of the things that I have said in the past is, in the mystery schools, undergraduate was the 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, arithmetic, although that was the last one. It was after you did geometry and astronomy, then you got arithmetic. And then the master's degree was astrology, because you could apply astronomy and geometry and arithmetic, right? And you would begin to see, as above, so below. What was going on in the planets was going on in the people. What was going on in the people was going on in the planets. There was no difference, which led you into alchemy, which is the doctorate in the mystery schools. This is the ultimate thing. And Isaac Newton, as an alchemist, accomplished his goal, and in the process established the basis for classical physics, which undermined all future alchemists, which I think is a very interesting thing. But it was because he was willing to explore different ways of doing things that he was able to do that. And it was because empire culture could only see the materialist parts of what he was doing, could only allow for that, because a taker culture is based on the value of the materials, not of the people, not of the beings. And that's part of why it is falling apart. So it turns out that not only do we have alchemy, we also have a new field of study.
So in the Matrix, you know, what you've got is the whole world is a computer program. And what makes Neo special is that he can break the rules of the program. And so that's what gives him his phenomenal sort of cosmic powers in the digital realm that descend into really, really bad film by the third installment. What Neo can do is change the rules that the world is based on. And for a constructivist, that's what people are doing all the time. So there's this sort of endless cycle where we're constantly changing these rules, we're constantly changing the way social life works in little bitty ways that are themselves framed by the way social life already works. Well, constructivists want to see the world as something that we build out of the way we relate to each other. So think about this. If everybody woke up tomorrow morning and we decided that the United States just doesn't exist, well, it doesn't exist anymore. Because what makes up the United States isn't the buildings and the bombs and the votes. It's everybody thinking that those things make up the United States, and that we agree that we act and we treat each other as if the United States is there.
All right? He goes on, I hadn't realized, I forgot how short this was. He goes on to say, you know, it happened in Russia, in the Soviet Union. In a matter of weeks, everyone just said, why are we doing this? It doesn't exist anymore. Now, there were ways that was helped, and Gorbachev, being a philosophy professor, helped. But, you know, that capacity to say, it doesn't have to be like this, and simply do it differently. One of the reasons that China is now the #1 economy in the world and is about to be the #1 military presence in the world is because a whole bunch of people said, I'm not doing it that way. I'm going to set up a little stand on the countryside and I'm going to sell a few things. And they began a process that's called community capitalism. This is not corporate greed capitalism. This is not something that says the only thing you're allowed to do by law is maximize the shares to your dividends, the dividends to your shareholders. That's what a corporation is required, a C corporation. Maximize the dividends to their shareholders. Not maximize the production quality, not maximize the service to the customer, not maximize the benefit to the world. None of that. So a new kind of company has been invented. It's called a B company. That is, you know, it's three things. It's not just profits, it's also people and the planet. But they have to write a whole separate annual report that proves that why they didn't maximize their profits to their shareholders. So community capitalism is different. It's this hotel. This is a community capitalist kind of a thing. It's the small shop down the road. It's the shoemaker or the guy setting up a computer repair shop or any of those things. And the idea of having shareholders is forget it. We have companies in this country that are worth far more than anything on Wall Street that are family-held corporations, and if something goes wrong with their company, they figure out a way to keep their employees. They don't have to maximize anything for any shareholders. Their job is to take care of the people in the community they're in. There was a wire maker in Connecticut, and the fire destroyed the factory. He paid everyone every day until they got the new one built. Yes, that's community capitalism. And that's the kind of thing that has transformed every economic system on the planet into something that can work. And it's what allows a village to thrive. It's what Adam Smith was talking about. Don't let anybody tell you any different from that. You can read him if you have to, or go back to Robert Heilbronner's Worldly Philosophers and read that. So when we start realizing that the only thing holding our institutions together is our agreement that they are institutions, then something begins to be transformed. And this is the beginning of what I'm calling transformational consciousness. And it is it's 8:45. I was thinking we were going to 9. I hope it's okay. So I'm saying there are 4 stages in consciousness development. The first one is it's concrete. There is a baby in the manger. There are 3 wise men and they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. There is a star in the sky. All right? That is very concrete. The next one, and it says, if I can't measure it, it isn't real. All right? Most 25-year-old or 15 to 25-year-old scientists are concrete level of consciousness, and it's okay. Keep loving them. Then something begins to happen and people start questioning, there's got to be some symbolism behind this. There's got to be something. I'm getting, there's another meaning. I mean, how many people have read Harry Potter and realized, oh, there's another meaning here? Or read the Rings, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and saw the deeper meaning there. So when you start to get that this is a symbolic possibility, then you start getting the realization that the abstraction behind the concrete is valid, something to look at. And so that then brings us to the next stage, and that is the world is a metaphor. And this is where Joseph Campbell thrived, because he saw myth and meaning. And Jung also saw this, that over and over again, people's stories of their lives, people's dreams, people's myths and legends were these metaphorical interpretations of what was going on in their world. And then they began to get what the founder of Unity, Charles Fillmore, realized when he wrote the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, that everything around us is showing us what's going on inside us. It's a metaphor for our consciousness. And that then leads us. And there's actually a book called The Reflexive Theory, if you want some scientific approach to all of that. But what that leads to is that what I am experiencing is an ongoing creative process that I am at the least part of. This is co-creative, but perhaps I am the sole creator. There's a guy named Thomas Troward. He was writing between 1906 and 1918, plus or minus. He was a retired jurist, a magistrate out of the British system in India. He had spent 30 years in the Punjab, learned every language that is spoken in the Punjab, that's 6 languages, also read Greek and Latin and Hebrew, and Arabic and Sanskrit. And he read the Bible every day. And he wrote a series of books and gave a series of lectures. It's my current book that I'm working on, translating some of those into modern English. And he calls God the creative process in the individual. He never uses the 3-letter word. The creative process in the individual. Each of us is that creative process unfolding in us, through us, as us, for us, and by us. It's a marvelous realization when you can start accepting that. And what happens is the intellect can begin to grasp it, and I see that all your intellects, or at least most of them, are going, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And then it needs to settle down into our actions and our feelings and our heart and all of that. So there's a guy, David Hawkins, in Sedona, developed this grid. And I'll use my little mouse here. So most of America is being kept in here. Fear, anxiety, grief, regret, apathy, and despair. This is what the media is doing. This is why other countries don't understand what's happening here. They can't, here we are in the richest nation in the world, using more resources than anybody else, and why are our people down here? Well, because that's what they're being fed, right? And so I usually say, if you want to go into another state of consciousness, take a media fast. So we're here, but if we go up here, this is where our founding fathers were. They were affirming, they were empowered. They saw the deist model of God. This is someone who's kind of out of the way. He's permitting, he's allowing things to happen. And that makes everything feasible, and that gives us courage. So if you've read any of the biographies, I love David McCulloch's biographies of the founders. They're just marvelous. Or Ben Franklin's autobiography. You get this. So if we think of this in terms of the chakras, we've got the root, the base, and the solar plexus. So here we're functioning at the level of the solar plexus. This is our power chakra. This is where we act from. And all too often, when we're trying to reconcile with someone, we speak from here. And I was dealing with this with my own mother for a while, and I was with the therapist, and he said, I was rehearsing what I was going to say. I'm going, this is not how I want it to sound. He says, he takes my hand, he says, you're speaking from here. Move it up to here. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. No defensiveness, no assertiveness, no aggressiveness, simply what wanted to be said in a loving, truthful way. Amazing. Anyway, so that gets us up to the green. Acceptance, forgiveness, ooh, transcendence. And here we're seeing a whole different kind of relationship with that creative process. It is a creative process that is supportive of who we are becoming. It is enabling us to become even more. And then we get up to that level of the throat chakra, that level of information and wisdom and expression. And we have reason being experienced here. And this is where Emerson hung out, right in here, Ralph Waldo Emerson, where reason was, with a capital R, very important to him, and the wisdom and the meaningfulness and the understanding. And boy, he could abstract anything. One of my books is Natural Abundance, and it's translating a bunch of Emerson essays. Okay, so we keep on going. And as we begin to have love and joy be what we're dealing with, we start to be the kind of person a Mahatma Gandhi or a Mother Teresa was working as, right? We have a whole different notion of the nature of divinity, that there is just this pure love. And a lot of the unity work is in that level. And then there is the one, just recognizing it's all one width, one interconnected web of life, one people, one planet, one. There is a book by Raisha called One that helps explain all of that. And we enter into that wonderful state of serenity. Right? And finally, as we reach, into the crown chakra, we start getting into this idea that the self, I am that creative process unfolding in my world. Oh my goodness. Now, my emotional reaction is to backpedal immediately. And I've been doing this work for a long time, consciously aware, okay? But my emotions still say, oh, no. Right? And I have to go through that little trigger and go, oh, yes, it's okay. It's okay. We can do this. We can do this, right? All right, if we can hold that for any length of time, and most of us are able to do that in some states of meditation, or if as you experience what Joe shared with me as that beautiful bliss of silence, you get to be up there for a little while. Now, one of the things that is not on this chart, but David Hawkins was playing with, is what is the impact on the people around you of the state of consciousness you're in, right? So if we go down here, apathy, guilt, and shame, you're affecting one or two people, right? There's not much going on in your world. You get up here to anxiety and fear and grief, you're going to start affecting your community in some significant ways. And then when we get up into the affirming and the courage and the empowerment, wow, we start having communities and organizations and countries, nations form around us, right? And this is an amazing process. Hundreds of thousands of people can be affected by people who are living at this level of consciousness. Especially when you get what Margaret Mead called a small group of thoughtful, committed people at this level, right? All right. And then as you move up further and further, it's a logarithmic scale. So by the time you're up here where Mother Teresa and Gandhi were, you're affecting millions of people just by being who you are. Being in that level of consciousness, feeling these kinds of feelings, thinking about God in these kinds of ways, exploring what it means to be living in joy. Exploring the experience of serenity instead of running from it, which is what our culture has taught us to do, right? So this is a wonderful model to help us understand that development of consciousness and to give us some examples. In the Neolithic communities, those upper levels were how these people were, the wise woman and the medicine man, that's where they would ideally be living if they were going to be most effective. And that's where they were trained to. In the Hebrew text, we have Joseph and Moses and Elisha demonstrating that. In the New Testament, we have Jesus and Paul most of the time, not always. Paul somehow missed the mark a few times. Then some people suggest that's because there are actually about 5 different people that all called themselves Paul and wrote under that name. If we look at ancient Greece, Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and lots of other people that most people who haven't studied ancient Greece know anything about. And then as we go, as I said earlier, our more recent examples are people like Gandhi and Mother Teresa. And it's not a surprise and no accident that they're in India, because India is the one place in the world where it's been okay to be spiritual since the 1950s. Right? Now we're getting back to, there are more places where it's okay. But it was a really, really, powerful desert for a long time. And these people were able to embody that way of being. And how is it that they can affect all these people? Well, we are not limited to the bodies, are we? Most of you have felt your own field, right? You know where your body field normally is, right? It's usually somewhere between 6 and 18 inches, your normal. And the Institute of Heart Math, right, has explained how that all works, the vibrations of the hearts and the lungs and the electromagnetic fields that are created, okay? And then, have you learned to expand it? Oh, good. Or pull it back in? That's, very good, very good. Very marvelous, useful tool. To feel, there was, I just lost his name. There's a guy who suggested that people should go into shopping malls and become invisible. Pull in their energy so far that nobody even sees you. And then Huh?
Stuart Wilde.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That is who it was. So, the other piece of it is because it's out there, it's always overlapping other beings, right? And then there is the theory of morphic resonance that says if my energy field is shaped and working in frequency like this, then anyone who is resonating with that is going to be affected by anything that I'm doing and being, wherever they are, whether I've ever met them or not. And it's been well established, that theory. It's not, it's on the edge of being a law. So Mark Nepo, an incredibly powerful reader, and reading if you need a source, has said that when we heal ourselves, we are healing the world. We can't not. Everything that we are becoming, the world is becoming. As we accept that knowledge and that realization, it reinforces that transformational consciousness, right? Because I realize, wow, if I can get through this, if I can experience love and joy and bliss regardless of the appearances, if I can know the truth regardless, and truth with capital T, not the facts and appearances, not truth, facts and appearances. If I can know that, then the whole world is enhanced by that. That is so huge. So to be aware that we are transforming the world is one definition of transformational consciousness. Now, if you don't believe it, you can pay attention to the Global Consciousness Project. Everyone's seen this stuff? Yeah, this was the stuff that Dean Radin and other folks did. You get the, if you weren't aware of it, I love that the stuff started to happen, at around midnight between the 10th and the 11th. Yeah. The guys hadn't even got on their planes yet, right? Or the earthquake, was being felt slightly, right there, and it had already, there were bubbles in this is the Japanese earthquake of 2011. I was awake when it happened. I was on the internet. I saw the banner go by. I was on the Oregon coast. It never even occurred to me there was a problem. I just sent, on my coast, I just sent them blessings, and went to sleep. Everyone else in my community was waked up, but I was up on a hill, so I didn't hear any of that. And they all were up hiding in the in the hotels and everywhere they could up above the elevations, thinking there was this huge tsunami coming to get them. It was supposed to get there before 7:30 in the morning. It got there at 12:30 in the afternoon. And by the time it got there, it was 6 inches high. In some places, it was 18 inches high. This huge tsunami that everyone had been waked up and set off to safety for. I'm convinced that it had to do with our consciousness more than anything else. Right? It was about being in tune with each other and caring about each other and loving each other and not going into great fear. Because none of us were in fear. It happened. I was on a bridge when it finally arrived. I got to watch it come in and go right on past me. Right? Who knew? So each of us is a unique pattern of energy with a unique set of qualities and skills, right? There's nobody like any one of you here. That we brought to this lifetime to make a unique contribution to this planet. What's yours? When you are aware of what that is and you start living your life in terms of that, not to fix anything, but just to be the contribution that you are, and you let that be your guiding light, you won't break your leg. When you let that be your guiding light, the whole world must be transformed. It can't not. That's my definition of must. Can't not. And the more of us who do that, the theory of morphic resonance tells us, the more of us are doing that. And it's an exponential. And that's what I came here to say tonight. I want to thank you all very much for your time and your patience and your willingness. And being you.
Would you mind if we had minutes for Q&A?
You got me as long as you want me.
Okay.
Well, at least until 2 tomorrow when I have to get on a plane.
Again, thank you so much. What a marvelous, inspirational presentation, as always. Thank you.
Thank you, dear.
Okay, so we do have a little bit of time, and I apologize the evening is a little long, but I know you have some questions for Ruth, so please, the podium is yours.
I'll say something. Talking about Hawkins, about 10 years ago I was in California with Hay House, and he was giving a speech, and I got to be like classroom monitor, which was super cool. And he was on stage, and there were people in the audience that had a camera that were taking pictures of people's auras. And so he was on stage, so they took a picture of him, and just for all the scientists in the room, so behind him was a light of energy that was going straight towards the back of his head, and where they captured the picture, it stopped like right here, but you could tell the projection was going. It was really pretty incredible to see that.
Love it. That's beautiful.
So it just talks about the energy that he consistently registers.
Yeah, his experience is amazing. He was a psychotherapist. He had a huge wake up, and all of a sudden people would come to his office and they'd walk out done. Right? And they started lining up around the block, and that's when he left New York. Thank you. That's beautiful. Other comments? Yes?
Ruth, I just want to say that being in your presence is important. You carry a lot of energy that is more than just your words, and your words are good, but the energy that you carry is just phenomenal, and I want to thank you.
Oh, thank you, dear. Back at you. Thank you. Yes?
You mentioned in the very last slide about how we all have a unique energy blueprint. I'm just curious if you've ever heard of human design.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And we dare not try to take
great.
that on now.
Yeah.
Thanks. I saw something. Yes?
Yeah, I work in an area of change.
Yeah.
You mentioned that this whole transformative type of thing and the change, and then you sort of ended the presentation with Hawkins and the different layers. And what I found is that our nervous systems are not ready for this in many ways.
Not everybody's is.
Yeah.
Right.
The typical nervous system is at the lower end, living in a fearful uncertainty.
Right, which is why he's got that there, right?
Consciousness.
Because the culture tries to keep us down there. It's trained, the empire culture is trained to keep the bulk of people, the Senate is up here and the people are down here. The Senate works up there at the yellow and the green. The people are down here. In the Roman model, in our model, that's similar. We just don't use the same words. So if you've got folks who are stuck, in they're cycling round and round, they're spinning round and round in their fear and their apathy and their anxiety and their upset, right? Then no, there is no way they're going to move to love. It's not happening. If you can get someone from, condemning and fear and grief up to anger, you've done a huge job. That's a huge improvement, right? If you can actually get to the anger overshadowing the fear and the anger. Remember the guy I told about who's now earning money? We spent a year in his anger because he had been down there in apathy and despair virtually his whole life. And his body was falling apart. His nervous system, literally he'd go into seizures if he was asked to go up to hate, or scorn or pride. He'd literally go into seizures. It was fascinating. So
what we have done is we've created, and it's interesting you use the colors, because I don't think he uses colors in the book.
Actually, no, he doesn't in the book, but he does on his website. This is on his website.
There may be an update to it. But, so we use different biophysical types of interventions of light, color, and vibration.
Marvelous.
Okay, all integrated to move people up this chain.
Beautiful. I'm delighted. Now, this isn't, a the only model of how to make this work. This is a model that is effective. There are other models that are also effective, but it's a very effective one. So, but yes, there are all kinds of modalities to facilitate that shift from the bottom levels, the root chakra and base chakra stuff, into the upper levels of experience. And the more we do the work, the easier it is for them to do the work. Right? As we're moving up into the green and the blue, and most of us are in that yellow, maybe a little bit of the orange, but yeah, no, we're up in there. As we're moving into the green and the blue, we're literally lifting all of humanity out of the red and the orange. Isn't that cool? That's how it works. There's a line in the Course in Miracles that I love. The only way to get to heaven is to take your brother with you. Isn't that wonderful? You can't, it's not that you have to reach down and grab your brother. It's that the process of getting into heaven is your brother comes with you. Right? And the Bodhisattva vow is, I will enter heaven as all other beings are ready to enter heaven. It's the same thing. As you know, it's all one creative process. The world I'm experiencing is a reflection of what's in here. So as I experience more and more bliss and joy, then the world I'm experiencing gets to have that too. All right, she had one more comment back there, and then John.
I had a vision once where I was a figure in a painting. And I was trying to get out of the two-dimensional painting. Trying to pull away. And I realized that in order for me to get out of the two dimensions, I had to pull everything in the painting out with me.
Woof! Right, and let it not be stuck in what it was, in the form that it was. That's beautiful. John.
Yeah, just a couple of things. One of the things that guides us is that what Thich Nhat Hanh is, said that community is the next guru, and it's in that intersection where life happens, and also that scale is really important, and that is that when we look out at the world, there is a tendency to go into overwhelm. So if you stretch your arms out on either side of yourself, in most cases you'll come up with around 6 feet. And so in that 6 feet, become completely mindful of that 6 feet, and then as others adopt the 6-foot carrying circles, then a lot of things shift.
That is beautiful. Yeah, that is lovely.
And the one final thing I wanted to say is that in the spiritual path, one of the things that's so noticeable, even though we reference the body as being a vehicle, the seat of the soul, is that we don't pay attention to the body. And when Thich was asked, how do I love myself? He said, well, start with say hello to your body. Say hello, I'm home. And it is so self-evident with the epidemics of chronic and autoimmune diseases that we're not paying attention.
Yeah.
And then when we do, and we get into that we're really only 10% human, 90% in ecosystem, then we really have to begin to look at all of that transformation that occurs by being respectful and having deep humility and gratitude. And then as our whole body begins to transform, so do we lighten our load. So those are some things.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And again, simply by treating the body as the ecosystem that we are part of, then you've literally transformed, contributed to the transformation of the whole.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. That's just beautiful. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? Oh, Deborah. Deborah?
Yeah, I just want to say really quickly, that thing that you have that is the orange up to the, so you know some of my work is with what the state of Texas deems drug offenders, and I have 15 hours with them, and they come in, the one that's on the very bottom is shame. And like I get to, over the week, watch them go up to, maybe not the top one, but at least the one that's going, because there is no judgment.
Right.
And that is the thing that I am told the most, is that they're able to hear each other and see themselves in each other.
Yes.
And just be in a place that, and they tell me all the time, I had to get arrested and go through the court system to be able to forgive myself.
Yes.
For things, and going back to what you were saying, a lot of them are using substances, and people with mental health issues as well.
Sure.
Because it's just too much.
Sure.
And I see that and hear that all the time, which makes it for me even more like, just go up the ladder, like go up. And we use Maslow's hierarchy in that class.
Sure.
But it just, seeing that, I'm so grateful that you put that, because I've never seen that before, and I'm going to start referencing it.
Lovely. I'm so pleased that you found another tool. Yeah, it's wonderful work that you do, truly, and I appreciate it a whole lot. Thanks, Deborah. All right, I think we have to declare ourselves done.
Thank you. I just one final comment. One thing that you said that really struck me this evening was in terms of changing the world. You know, when we see the world differently, the world actually changed. That's not a metaphor. That's a truth. And the point you made about how do we do that, and what you said to that was, when we give ourselves permission to be our authentic self, when we're in that space, we're all powerful. All powerful. We are very powerful. And I know we're not using, but maybe 4 or 5% of that as far as our minds are concerned. But you said so many wonderful, powerful things that you shared with us this evening. That one really grasped my attention. That's
beautiful.
To the core.
And it's a spiral process. So my authentic self was when I first started this work is not who my authentic self is now. Right? I'm going to continue to be developing that. And as I develop it, then everyone develops it. Yes, it's beautiful. Thank you. And the world will show me exactly where I need to work to continue the process. Wherever I'm getting triggered, hooked, bothered, and wherever there's any distress, that's where I need to work. And I need to hold that image of the potential, the full capacity human being for myself and for the other person. That's the huge thing that you do. You see the full capacity human being. And in Unity and Science of Mind, that's called treatment. Right? When you know that, you hold that for yourself and for other beings, we all begin to experience it because, as Emma Curtis Hopkins says, that is omnipotent truth. It is the only power, the only presence, and the only possibility. Good night.